Welcome back to another technical video. In today's video, I'm going to show you how to customize a few basic elements on the chart, such as font, chart type, time zone, but also some more advanced ones like study access, drawing access, formatters, and overrides. Just a quick recall that most properties have been available for a long time and should work on any recent version of the library, but we always recommend having the latest or not too far off version to enjoy the full potential of the library. If that's the first time you are setting up the library or you are facing some issues, please refer to our setup video or the library documentation or even GitHub. That being said, let's dive in. I'm going to open the web page for the library on the right-hand side of the screen, and on the left-hand side you can see the code of the index.html. So this is where we are going to instantiate the widgets here, and where we are passing few parameters to the constructor in order to have a customized version of the library. As you can see here on the right, we have the default chart presented without any changes. So now I'm going to show the widget constructor page on GitHub that lists all the possible properties, and we will have a look at what they do. So scroll down a bit, and here is where the list starts. So let's check them out one by one. Let's take the first two, symbol and interval. If you click on the link, you will see a description of what those parameters are and do. Here, it's for changing the symbol that's displayed when loading the chart. Same for the interval. That represents a time period for one single bar. As an example, let's pretend we want to display IBM instead of AAPL with an interval of 1 week. Let's jump back to the code. Remove AAPL and put IBM instead. And as for the resolution, the interval, let's change it from 1D to 1W. Save the file and reload the page. You can now see that the chart represents IBM and the resolution has been set to 1 week, which means that every single bar represents 1 week. Next parameter is container. Click on it to get an explanation at what it does. It's basically a reference to where in the DOM the library is going to be put. Let's go back to the code. Now let's pretend we have some complex UI with different sections. In our example, we could imagine having 3 sections. Let's call them container 1, container 2, and container 3. Each one will have a title. Title 1, title 2, and title 3. Now let's change the parameter container to reflect our changes. If we specify container 1, the library will be placed inside the first div. Let's save the changes and reload the page. We are now going to open the DevTools and inspect the DOM. As you can see, the iframe containing the library is in the first div. And if you scroll down, you will see title 2 and title 3. Now we are going to reference container 2 in the code and refresh. Library is no longer in container 1, but in container 2, which is in the second div. And the same would apply if we were to specify container 3 instead and refresh the page. So we would have title 1, title 2, and the library, the iframe, would be contained in container 3. Next parameter is datafeed. I'm not going to go into too much detail here. Another video will be made to cover this very important aspect of providing data to the chart. Next parameter is library path. Not much to say about this one. It's just a path to the folder containing your library. Next up is time frame. Reading the documentation, it says that's the period of bars that will be requested and displayed on the chart. By default, the chart will display as much possible data to satisfy the resolution or interval here set to 1 week. But if we copy and paste the given time frame from the documentation into the code and reload the page, the chart will only display 3 months worth of data, still satisfying the resolution. Another video will explain how and why the look and feel of the bar has changed. It has to do with visible range, bar spacing, and thickness of bars. Now, let's talk about time zone. It's a setting to change the values displayed on a timescale according to a certain time zone. Let's say you are in New York or Sydney. You would probably like to set up your chart according to your location. So you can easily do that by providing here time zone America, New York, or Australia/Sydney, or any other nearby time zone. Once you refresh the page, you will see here a change. Now, debug. I won't give too much details about this one, as it's an important one that will require a dedicated video. Basically, it's very useful when dealing with data feeds and bars to identify why the chart is behaving the way it does, the number of bars requested, as opposed to possibly the number of bars received. When you turn that parameter on and refresh the page, you will see in the console of your DevTools a bunch of console log like these ones. But like I said, a dedicated video will be made to better explain how to read the logs. Let's talk about width and height. Those two parameters are used when you are embedding the chart on a page that doesn't take up all the space. If we were to specify those two values, let's say with a width of 800 and height of 500, we save it, we reload the page, and you can clearly see that the chart is smaller than before. And if we open DevTools and inspect our div, we can clearly see that the dimensions specified are the ones of the parameters. The same spirit has width and height. There is a specific parameter to directly set up the chart to take up all the space on the page, and that parameter is full screen. So you can either set it up to true or false, and if you refresh the page, it will take up or not all the space on the page. As opposed to full screen, autosize tries to fit the chart as closely as possible to the dimensions of the container it's going to fit in. Let's check this parameter in action. But for that, we have to set up the scene first. For the purpose of this demo, I'm going to specify some dimensions for the container and a color for the background. Here, let's say blue. At first, imagine the value of autosize to be false. And reload the page. We can see that the chart has loaded with some default dimensions and that the background color is visible, meaning the chart does not take up all the space it should. However, if I set the value to true and reload the page, now the chart will be exactly or close to the dimensions of the div. No background color can be seen at this point. Symbol search request delay. This one is self-explanatory, as it's the time in milliseconds that will be elapsed between requests when searching for a symbol. It's used to unload server without impacting too much the user experience. To demo this one, let's open the Network tab from the DevTools. Whenever I want to search for a new symbol, let's say AAPL, you can see there is multiple requests for each keystroke. If now I'm changing the value for this setting to be, let's say, 2000 for 2 seconds and reload the page, you can now observe that if I perform the exact same search, only one request will be made after 2 seconds. Now, autosave delay is the time in seconds this time between two automatic saves. This is again to limit the number of requests. Demoing this one requires a bit of plumbing, as there is a few methods listed in various pages of the documentation, such as saving and loading charts or widget methods. It involves subscribing to events and setting up how the chart will be saved on the server. So for that, let's start by specifying the time after which an event will be raised upon modification on the chart. Here it's going to be 5 seconds. Now, let's subscribe to that specific event on autosave needed, like this. Finally, the saving to the server function. When you launch all of that, you can see some traces. but it's when you actually change anything on the chart, such as adding an indicator or changing the resolution or anything else that you see logs informing you that something has changed. This time the parameter is toolbar background. So the name is not very explicit, but it means changing the color for both the drawing toolbar on the left hand side and the one at the bottom. So if I just select what's on the example, paste it and refresh, you can see that the toolbars have changed colors. Study count limit. Now, this time the parameter is about the number of studies allowed on the chart. For whatever reason, you could decide to limit that number. There is no limit by default, but at some point you may find your chart a tiny bit overwhelming. Study count limit allows you to display a message when the user is about to add more studies than permitted. Here, for instance, if I put a limit at 5, whenever I try to add more than 5, a pop-up will inform me that I've reached the maximum number allowed. Studies access. Still talking about limits. You could imagine a scenario where you only want to show a certain number of indicators to your users. This parameter allows you to indicate two things. Is a particular study displayed on the list? And if displayed, will the user have access to it? Let's take the first one. You simply decide on the name of the indicator you'd like to hide from the list or show. For that, there is the type option. If the specified study is of type black, it would be removed from the list. As an example, let's first check that moving average is part of the list. As you can see, if I scroll down, it's available. Now, for instance, I decide to remove moving average from the list. I simply define the name and the type. I refresh and I check that moving average is no longer part of the list. On the other hand, if white is specified, the user will only see that indicator. For the second use case, you could decide to only allow certain users to benefit from a subset of indicators and others another set. For this, you could decide to gray out some indicators. If now I decide to gray out moving average, if I refresh the page, you will see that the indicator is present, but it's not possible to select it. Drawings access. Like studies access, this option lets you customize what's available or not to your users. By default, everything is available, but you could decide to remove or gray out some features. As an example, let's first check that trend line is available. Not only it is, but it's also the default option for that section. If now I decide to gray it out, if I refresh the page, it's now still present, but I'm not able to select it, and the default option is now the next available one, arrow. If I only specify type black, the feature is no longer present in the list. On the other hand, if I specify white for this type, not only will my option only be trend line, but all other drawing features will be removed too. Save data. The purpose of this parameter is to load a previously saved chart during the initialization of the widget. Let's imagine you create the following chart by randomly placing a trend line and two emojis. Then I can emulate the save function by just invoking this function. I then copy the content directly to the widget constructor, and given the size of the object, that's clearly not something we should be doing, but that's just for demoing the purpose of this setting. If I now refresh the page, you can see that the chart is identical to what we had before. Locale. This setting is one of the most straightforward one. It's basically to choose the locale you'd like the chart to be in. TradingView supports around 30 different languages at the moment. By default, it's EN for English. But if I change it to something like FR for French and refresh, then all the text in the UI will be in French. Same if I put AR for Arabic. If not specified in the widget constructor, an equivalent to changing the language would be to just add a parameter to the URL, such as this one, and refresh. Numeric formatting. This very easy to use parameter is to just replace the decimal sign everywhere on the chart, such as the price scale or the legend. Let me show you. I just copy and paste the suggested code, save it, refresh, and instead of a dot, you'll see a comma everywhere. Custom formatters. In the same vein as numeric formatting, this one allows you to format specific objects on the chart. Customization can be done for the time displayed at the bottom right, also where a user selects a time zone, or to format the date displayed on a timescale when moving the cursor of the mouse over the chart. tick-mark formatter, on the other hand, is used to format the date directly on the time axis. Finally, price formatter factory could be seen as an extension of numeric formatting in a way you could change price shown on the price scale depending on the precision set in chart settings. Given it's rather long and complex, let's check all the parameters with an example. Let's start with time formatter. By default, it displays the time in hours, minutes, and seconds. If you enable the suggested code, for example, it now only displays the time with hours and minutes with the selected time zone, but this time we don't have seconds. Next is date formatter. By default, you can see that it displays the date for the selected bar with the format day, month, and year. If we were to apply the format suggested in the documentation, it then displays the time in the format year/month/day. For tick mark formatter, you can see on the time axis that we have month written with 3 letters and a year to separate them. Again, if we uncomment the block and refresh, we now have month displayed as M something, and years are prefixed by a Y. Finally, price formatter factory. By default, it just displays the price with 2 leading zeros. This can be changed to whatever you'd like depending on the selection of the precision. The block I have uncommented, or I'm uncommenting, here is for changing the price for fractional precisions. If I refresh and then select any fractional precision from within the chart settings, now the price will be fixed to whatever my logic was in the formatter. Overrides. Overrides is one of the parameters we get the most questions about, as it allows you to override some properties of the library without having to go through the chart settings. Since there is so many properties you could customize, please have a read at the dedicated documentation page that details all the properties. As shown in the documentation, let's say you want your chart not to be candles by default, but line when initializing the chart. Simply copy and paste the suggested piece of code, and when you refresh the page, you'll see that the chart type has changed. One thing to keep in mind is that there's always a way to change those properties on the fly using an API without having to fiddle with the settings. You could use the apply overrides function, which is available through the widget itself. Taking the previous example, you could imagine a scenario where, given a specific symbol, you'd like the chart to be of type candle, whereas for the other ones, you want to keep line. To do that, open the console from the DevTools and type the following command. Here you can see that the chart went from line to candle. Disabled features, enable features. Disabled and enabled features is a very important aspect of the library in terms of customization, in the way you could hide or show certain elements in the UI and or activating or deactivating functions or features within the library. If you were to click on the link here, you'll be redirected to a page that lists all of the elements you can interact with. The list is rather long, so I'm going to stick with the names suggested in the documentation. Once you understand how it works, it's easy to just check back the list and try for yourself. Here, the first feature to be disabled is header widget. If I simply add this string to the array of strings for disabled features and refresh the page, you can observe that the header of the chart is no longer present. If I remove it from the list, it's back. The next feature is left toolbar, meaning it has to do with the drawing toolbar. If I add it to disabled and refresh, now the toolbar is gone. For the last example, we are enabling a feature, but we are not going to take the one suggested, as it does not bring value to the demo. But let's check the list of features that are by default off and we could turn on. Let's try hide resolution in legend. Not the biggest, but it will remove the resolution from the legend at the top left of the chart. Custom indicators getter. Very interesting feature, as it allows anyone to build their own indicator. By default, the library comes with plenty of already built-in indicators. But there is always a situation for which you could be missing something and would like to bring in your own logic or drawing to the chart given some data. Another important aspect when it comes to indicators is that all indicators are calculated in the browser. So avoid as much as possible to make heavy calculation directly within the browser. And if you think you have to, maybe your logic or heavy calculation could be exported somewhere else and only rendered on the client. Very up to you. So if you click on the link here, you will have a detailed explanation as to what all parameters do and their meaning. Here I'm just going to show you via an example the end result. Let's click on coloring bars. Copy and paste the big block of code noted for formatting here and refresh the page. First thing to notice is in the developer console, where the library indicates that it has loaded one custom indicator. It may not work, but at least you know that the library is now aware of a new indicator. Open the indicators list and check the bar Colorer demo. Select it and boom, the result is applied. Studies overrides. In the same way we can customize the UI and some graphical elements, we can also tweak the style or inputs for indicators. Once again, there is a rather long documentation page that gives more details than this video, but I'm going to give it anyway. Taking, for instance, volume, which is the primary default indicator added to the chart from the launch point. By default, its colors are green when the volume has a positive closing value and red otherwise. But what if you want to change these colors? Some countries, for instance, or institutions don't use the colors the same way, or are used to describing a trend not using the usual red-green pattern. For this, you can use studies override straight from the widget constructor. For instance, if you copy and paste the suggestion the red is replaced by another color. It's probably not obvious, but the name of the property is first the name of the indicator, here is volume. Then it's followed by the name of the property we are changing, here again volume, because it's the same as the one in the style tab and here. Then it's slightly more tricky, as falling and growing are names for two colors, which internally are mapped to color dot here, and a number 0 for the first one, here falling, and 1 for growing. Same as with overrides. There is still a way to customize and interact with those settings afterwards. There's a little catch though. When using apply studies override, the potentially new settings are not directly applied on the fly, but whenever a study of that name is created. With the following piece of code, we are changing the color from whatever it was to blue for any positive volume. However, when we entered, nothing happened. For that, we have to remove the indicator first and add it back. Now the changes are considered. Timeframes. Take the time to carefully read the documentation, but it's basically to add buttons at the bottom left of the chart to directly display a range of bars. By default, there's 2 shown at the bottom left of the chart, 5 years and 1 year. If you click on it, it will potentially change the resolution at the top of the chart. Then request and display all the bars to satisfy the time frame. If I click on 5Y for 5 years, it will change the resolution to W, which is 1 week, and display bars where each bar would be 1 week of trading data. I let you read the documentation about resolution. But as an example, let's assume we want to display daily bars over 6 months. The code will look like that. If you click on it, so let's imagine that we were still on 5 years. If you click on 6 months, resolution will go from weekly to daily, meaning each bar will correspond to 1 day of trading, and 6 months worth of data will be displayed on the chart. Theme and custom CSS URL. Those two parameters among overrides are used to customize themes and colors of certain elements of the UI. By default, the theme is light, but it could be changed to dark, and except for the main chart that will remain white for readability purposes, the rest has changed. Of course, there is 2 ways to change the color of the background. One would be in the override section. The other one is directly in the chart setting. Another way to customize the look and feel is to rely on a CSS file. Let's create a directory here, CSS, and within it a file called style.css. Let's copy and paste this block and set our custom CSS URL parameter to read this file. Refresh, and voila, the UI has changed. Custom font family. This parameter is simply to change the font for some UI elements of the chart. Again, for readability reasons, the text within the chart or header can't be changed using this parameter, but the price and time axis, along with graphical elements placed on the chart, will be. As the doc says, there is 2 ways to do that. One is using a CSS reference, and the other one is by simply indicating a new font to the widget. For this example, let's use Chalk Duster. Paste, save, refresh. So the price axis and time axis have changed, and if I was to put some text, it's of the font we have specified. Favorites. Favorites is interesting in the sense it allows users to store some preferences in local storage, such as resolutions and chart types. Once selected, those items will have a star next to the names, and shortcuts will be placed in the header for direct access. There's one catch though to turn that feature on. Since you need to store data in local storage, you have to remove the corresponding flag from the disabled features array. Otherwise, nothing will happen. Let's give it a try. Like I just said, we are removing the flag from disabled, which is there by default, and then just copy and paste the suggestion from the documentation. Refresh the page, and you can now see in the header that the chosen resolutions are now in the header. Same for the chart types. And they have, like I said, stars next to the names. Saved load adapter. This is a very important aspect of the library to understand and master. The documentation page is rather long to read, but I'll do my best to narrow it down and make it a short yet understandable and working example. By default, whenever you click on the Templates button or Save Load Layout, the library will display whatever it was able to pull up from TradingView's servers. This is coming from the chart storage URL that's set by default in Widget Constructor. That works fine, but down the road you probably don't want your users to see those tests first, and most likely you don't want any user to see anyone else's. That's when the Save Load Adapter setting comes into play. You could implement your own server and manage it the way you want. Here, we are not going to directly implement a server. Rather, we are going to just focus on the APIs used and put them directly into the widget constructor. Not all functions have to be implemented. It obviously depends on your needs. Here, I'm just going to demo all functions related to chart. But the same logic applies to templates as well. According to the documentation, there is 4 functions that deal with chart. Get all charts, remove chart, save chart, and get chart content. Get all charts is used when you click on that button. Behind the scene, it loads from the server all charts already saved and lists them in this window. Remove chart, as the name says, is to remove from the server a specific chart. Save chart is obviously used when saving the chart. Finally, get chart content is used when switching from one chart to another. Given it's an already rather long video, I'm just going to paste a piece of code with comment in it. Please take the time to carefully read it. Now it's time for the demo. Before we start, since I've added logs to the implementation, let's open the console from the DevTools. Now I'm going to click on Templates, which is now empty, but we can see the only log for templates is here, get all templates, which is this one. Same for loading layout. We have the message, but obviously none are saved for the moment. Let's just add an icon. And save it as test. Once again, you can see the message in the console, and there is now an additional cloud icon next to the name of the saved chart to indicate that the operation went well. Let's add another icon and save it with a different name, test2. Now, going back to the list of all charts, we now have the two names used for saving my two charts. If I click on the first one, the corresponding chart will be loaded with only one icon and the message. If I go back and click on the other one, both icons will be on a chart. Settings adapter. This is an interesting parameter as it allows you to save all chart settings to your own server rather than relying on local storage, for instance. It contains three methods: initial settings, set value, and remove value, that could be described as initial settings. What are the settings the chart should be initiated with? But it's also used to set watermark on the chart, as there is no other API to do so. Set value and remove value are triggered when there is a change in settings. But please note that by design, most of the time key value pairs aren't really removed from settings, but rather the corresponding value is changed. You could also imagine using those functions to directly interact with local storage in addition to your own backup of values on your server. Here's the quick example that just relies on console logs. First, we are adding a watermark on the chart. Then the logs are going to be printed in the console whenever there is a change. Here's the watermark. And whenever I change anything, you get the logs. Compare symbols. By default, when the user opens the compare dialog window, it's empty. And only when someone adds something to the chart that the symbol gets added to a list of recently used items. However, if for some reasons you are frequently dealing with the same symbols, you have an option to permanently add them to the list. For that, you just have to specify within an array an object that will have two properties: symbols for the exact symbol name as found on your server, and its title. Once done, Whenever you click again on the compare button, all your predefined symbols will now be listed. Additional symbol info fields. This setting is to complement information displayed in the symbol info dialog window. As you can see, there's already what we believe are essential or most commonly used info for symbols. However, you could imagine some scenarios where either your server has some specific additional information that should be reflected in that window, or that you'd like to see some already defined properties. For example, you could be interested in knowing what's the format used to display the price on the y-axis, or if your symbol supports intraday resolution. Just define a title and link it to its property name as defined in the documentation here. So let's copy and paste some things here. When you refresh the page and check again the info displayed for symbol info, you'll see the new details: ticker, format, and has intraday. Header widget buttons mode. This is a very straightforward setting. The purpose is to decide the layout and potential behavior for the header. It's linked to the responsiveness of the UI. By default, internally it's set to adaptive, to have a responsive UI, meaning whenever there is enough space to display both texts and icons, the UI will do it. Otherwise, it will only be icons. You could use this parameter to force it to always be full size, meaning it will always display both text and icon, whatever the size of the screen. On the other hand, you could go for compact, and then only icons will be displayed. Timescale. As described in the documentation, this setting allows you to add more or less bars on the chart without changing the resolution or the visible range. It controls the space a bar takes, meaning the higher the value, the bigger the bar and less bars on the chart. By default, the value is 0 and can't be negative, obviously. Here, if I specify 10, we'll have bigger bars. If I specify 50, obviously the bar will be bigger. Custom translate function. Once again, a very straightforward parameter to understand. It allows anyone to replace most of the strings present in a UI by something else. Its main purpose is for translation. TradingView supports about 30 languages, and obviously loads are missing, and some could have a missing translation. For instance, let's take the indicators button. You could decide for whatever reasons to change its text to something that suits you more. Just copy and paste some code and refresh. As you can see, the text inside the button has now changed. Symbol search complete. As the documentation puts it, this parameter allows you to override the symbol input from symbol search. It means that whenever you search for a symbol, there is a bunch of requests between the library and your server. However, some institutions or even yourself could be in a situation where official names are quite long or not explicit enough for your users. Or the opposite, having a name that's way too short and again not properly reflecting what the real symbol name is. That's when this function comes in handy. It allows you to rename the selected symbol to something different that will then be requested to your server and plotted on the chart. As an example, let's take the following piece of code. This code means that given a symbol, we are renaming it to something else that is now displayed on the chart. If we refresh and search for it, of course, no such symbols exist with that name, so there is some error messages, but you get the idea. Context menu. Context menu is interesting as it allows anyone to retrieve the list of items composing most right-clicked options. Some could be tempted to customize at will the content of each right-clicked menu. This could be by renaming, removing, or adding elements. For instance, when we right-click on the chart to invoke the menu, you've got a bunch of items. If I paste the following and open in another tab and open the console in DevTools, it gives the following output. If you expand all elements, you can see there is a match between the previously seen menu and the items listing this one. Paste, copy, reset, paste, copy, reset, and so on. Settings overrides. This is a subtle setting. As the documentation says, it overrides any previously set setting, whatever the origin of the value. It could come from your server or local storage. Setting overrides has the biggest priority. Let's check that over with an example. By default, trend line is of color blue. But if I remove use local storage for settings from disabled features, any changes to the color from the UI is saved in local storage. So to check that, open DevTools and check the Application tab. So here I'm going to change the original blue to red. You can check that the local storage reflects the change. Now, if I reload the page, my line will still be red. Now, if I set this new override that fixes the color to, let's say, green, when I reload the page, not only the red is still the main color in my local storage, but it's not even applied. The default color is now green.